People may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Maya Angelou. My name is Mr. Bennett. I have been teaching English for 25 years. I love my job because it is not just about grammar or vocabulary. It is about helping people connect. One day, I was standing in front of my class. My students were from different countries: Japan, Brazil, Iran, and Italy. Each one had a different story, but they all had the same dream: to speak English fluently. As I finished writing on the whiteboard, a young girl named Sophia raised her hand. She looked nervous. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly, "is my accent a problem? Will people laugh at me because of my accent?" The room became quiet. Everyone stopped writing. All eyes were on me. I looked at Sophia and smiled. "That is a very good question, Sophia," I said. "And I think the answer will surprise you." I paused, letting the silence build. The students leaned forward, waiting for my words. "You see," I began, "an accent is not a problem. An accent is a story." Sophia blinked. "A story?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Your accent tells people where you are from. It shows them your journey. It is not something to hide. It is something to be proud of." The students looked at each other, whispering in their native languages. I knew they were thinking about their own accent. I could see hope in their eyes. But I wasn't finished. I stepped closer to the class and lowered my voice. "Do you know what is more important than a perfect accent?" I asked. They shook their heads. "Communication," I said. "If people understand you, your accent doesn't matter. What matters is your confidence. What matters is your message." The room was silent again, but this time it was not because of fear. It was because of inspiration. "What happened next?" Sophia asked. I smiled. "Let me tell you a story about one of my students," I said. Her name was Maria, and her accent was very strong. But she taught me something that changed how I see accents forever. I took a deep breath and looked at my students. Maria was one of the most determined students I ever had, I began. She came from a small town in Spain, and her dream was to work in an international company in London. But there was one problem: her English was poor, and her accent was very strong. The class listened carefully. Even Sophia, who had been nervous, now looked curious. "When Maria spoke English," I continued, "people sometimes struggled to understand her. Her d sounded like z, and her sentences were full of small mistakes. One day, after an interview, she came to me in tears. She said, 'Mr. Bennett, I will never get a job. My accent is too strong. They will never take me seriously.'" I paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Can you imagine how she felt?" I asked the class. Sophia nodded. A boy from Brazil raised his hand. "I feel like that sometimes," he said. I smiled. "You're not alone," I replied. "Many people feel the same. But let me tell you what Maria did next." The students leaned forward, eager to hear. Maria didn't give up. She practiced every day. She recorded herself speaking and listened to the recordings. She talked to anyone who would listen: her neighbors, her co-workers, even strangers on the bus. But more importantly, she stopped being ashamed of her accent. She started seeing it as part of who she was. The student's eyes widened. "What happened next?" Sophia asked. "Well," I said, "one day Maria had another interview. This time, she didn't apologize for her accent. She focused on what she wanted to say, not how she said it. She told the interviewer about her skills, her ideas, and her passion. At the end of the interview, the manager smiled and said, 'Maria, your ideas are fantastic. Your accent just shows that you speak more than one language, and that's impressive.'" The class gasped. "She got the job?" a student from Japan asked. "Yes," I said with a smile. "She got the job. And do you know what she told me later? She said, 'Mr. Bennett, the day I stopped worrying about my accent was the day I found my confidence.'" I let those words hang in the air. The students were silent, but their faces showed a mix of relief and inspiration. I walked to the board and wrote in big letters, "Confidence is more important than perfection." I turned back to the class. "Your accent is a part of your identity. It's a reminder that you had the courage to learn something new. Don't let anyone make you feel small because of it." Sophia raised her hand again. "But Mr. Bennett," she said, "what if people still laugh?" I looked at her and said, "Sophia, if someone laughs at you, it says more about them than about you. Kind people will listen to what you say, not how you say it. And those are the people you want to talk to." I could see a spark in Sophia's eyes now. The fear was still there, but so was something new, hope. I looked around the class and smiled. "Let me tell you about two more students," I said. "Their stories are very different, but both are proof that your accent doesn't limit your success. First, let me tell you about Ibrahim," I began. Ibrahim was from Egypt, and his dream was to become an actor. He loved movies and wanted to see himself on the big screen, but there was one challenge: his accent. He spoke English with a strong Egyptian accent, and he was worried that no one in Hollywood would give him a chance. The students' eyes widened. "Hollywood?" one of them whispered. "Yes," I said with a grin. "Ibrahim told me, 'Mr. Bennett, how can I be an actor if I don't sound like an American?' I told him, 'Ibrahim, the world doesn't need more actors who sound the same. The world needs actors who are different, actors who are real.'" The students nodded. They could feel the tension in Ibrahim's story. "Ibrahim started practicing every day," I continued. "Not to lose his accent, but to make his voice stronger and clearer. He learned to speak with emotion and confidence. And you know what happened?" "What?" a student asked, leaning forward. "He got his first role in a small movie. The director told him, 'Your accent makes you unique. It gives your character depth.' From that day, Ibrahim stopped worrying about sounding American. He embraced his voice, and now he is a successful actor in international films. His accent is not a weakness, it is his strength." I paused for a moment, then said, "Now let me tell you about Grace. Grace is from China, and she moved to Canada 20 years ago. She has lived there for so long, but she still speaks with a strong Chinese accent. At first, she was embarrassed. She thought people wouldn't take her seriously. But Grace didn't let that stop her." "What did she do?" a student asked. She started her own business, I said. It was a small restaurant at first, but Grace's food was so delicious, and her personality was so warm, that people kept coming back. Soon, her business grew, and now she owns 5 restaurants in Toronto. She told me, "Mr. Bennett, I thought my accent would be a problem. But my customers don't care how I sound, they care about how I treat them and the quality of my work." The students smiled. They could see how Grace turned her fear into success. I turned back to the board and wrote, "Your accent is your story. Your success is your voice." I looked at the class. Ibrahim used his accent to stand out as an actor. Grace used her accent and kindness to build a business. And you, each of you, can use your accent to tell your story. Don't hide it. Don't fight it. Be proud of it. The room was filled with energy now. Sophia raised her hand one last time. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I think I understand now. My accent is part of me. I don't need to lose it, I just need to speak with confidence." I smiled. "That's right, Sophia. Speak with confidence. Speak with heart. And the world will listen." The classroom was quiet, but I could see the students were thinking deeply. I decided it was time to give them something practical, tools they could use to feel more confident when speaking English. I wrote 3 big words on the board: listen, speak, practice. I turned to the class. "The first step," I said, "is listening. If you want to improve your speaking, you need to train your ears first. Find something you enjoy, music, podcasts, movies, and listen every day. But don't just listen. Pay attention to how people pronounce words, how they stress certain syllables, and how their voices rise and fall." A student from Japan raised his hand. "But sometimes I don't understand everything," he said. "That's okay," I replied. "You don't have to understand every word. Focus on the rhythm and the emotion. Let your brain get used to the sounds of English. And remember, it's not about perfection, it's about progress." I pointed at the word speak on the board. "The second step," I said, "is speaking as much as you can. Don't wait until you feel perfect. Start now. Talk to your friends, your classmates, even yourself in the mirror." The students laughed. "Talk to myself?" a boy from Brazil asked. "Yes," I said, smiling. "It's a great way to practice. Look in the mirror and pretend you are having a conversation with someone. It might feel silly at first, but it will help you become more comfortable with the sound of your own voice." I paused and looked at the class. "And don't worry about mistakes," I added. "Mistakes are your teachers. Every time you make one, you learn something new." I underlined the word practice on the board. "The final step," I said, "is practice. And by practice, I mean every day. Even if it's just 5 minutes, make it a habit. Practice tongue twisters to improve your pronunciation. Record yourself and listen to how you sound. Read aloud from a book or an article." Sophia raised her hand. "What about speaking with native speakers?" she asked. "That's a great idea," I said. "But remember, native speakers are not the only option. You can practice with anyone who is learning English, just like you. The more you speak, the more confident you will become." I smiled and said, "Let me give you one more exercise: storytelling. Choose a simple story you like and tell it in English. Start with short sentences. Focus on the main idea, not every detail. And most importantly, enjoy it. One of the students from Italy raised his hand. But what if I get nervous? He asked. That's normal, I replied. When you feel nervous, take a deep breath and remind yourself, I am learning. It's okay to make mistakes. And remember, the goal is not to be perfect. The goal is to communicate. I turned back to the class and said, let's do a quick exercise now. I want each of you to stand up and say one sentence about yourself, something simple, like your name, where you're from, or your favorite hobby. Say it loudly and clearly. Don't worry about your accent. Just speak with confidence. One by one, the students stood up and spoke. At first, their voices were soft, but as they practiced, they grew louder and stronger. By the end of the exercise, the classroom was filled with voices and laughter. Remember, I said, as the class ended, your accent is not a barrier. It's a bridge. It connects you to the world. Speak with confidence, speak with heart, and don't stop practicing. The world needs your voice. The students left the classroom that day with smiles on their faces and a new sense of hope. And I stood there, knowing that their journey had just begun.